Hello and welcome to Pittsburgh City Council's Post Agenda for Thursday, November 7th, 2019. My name is Kim Clark Baskin and I am the Deputy City Clerk. With us today, we have our sign language interpreter, Logan Showalter. We have an agenda item at the request of Councilmember Teresa Kell Smith with a discussion on the disposition of publicly owned property sold by the City of Pittsburgh. That concludes the topic for today's discussion. Thank you and have a great day.
Hello, it is Thursday, November 7th, 2019, and I am City Councilwoman Deborah Gross. I chair Land Use and Economic Development, and this is a post agenda on the disposition of publicly owned property sold by the City of Pittsburgh. This agenda item was added to our agenda at the request of Councilmember Teresa Kell Smith, who unfortunately got called for jury duty today and asked me to chair for her. And we are joined today by three people, City Controller Michael Lamb, Aaron Pickett from our Real Estate Department at the City of Pittsburgh, and Margaret Lanier, Finance Director and Treasurer of the City of Pittsburgh. So welcome and thank you all for being here. Michael, Controller Lamb, I would like to start with you most recently because as I recall our council discussion, Councilwoman Smith was prompted by your recent performance audit of the Department of Finance and Treasurer's Office about property sales specifically. And I want to acknowledge that it's been some years now that since we were all talking about this in 2014 for quite a number of months when we went through it in much detail while Council had in front of it the legislation that I sponsored about creating a Pittsburgh land bank. That has been now, we passed that legislation in April 2014. So I'll just leave it with that and let you talk about your performance audit.
Yeah, so, I mean, the audit is, we looked at the process of selling properties that the city owns, and we're in an odd situation now, right? Because we are still doing treasurer sales, we're still conducting sales as we always have, but we also have the creation of the land bank. And it's confusing. It's really confusing because the land bank's not really up and running yet, even though it's been since 2014. The questions about how this process works have always been a little confusing, but they're even more so now. I think partly because we're in this period where have sort of two parallel universes about how property should be handled and what should happen with them. But when you looked at the process of just sales that the real estate division of finance were doing and how that was working, we took a look at that process from beginning to end and found that first off, it takes way too long. It's a very confusing and almost secretive kind of process. It's a process that is frustrating to the people who are trying to buy these properties because they are often given different information at different times throughout the process. It's what's really particularly frustrating is that when this process can last sometimes a couple of years, and then at the very end have the deal pulled out from under them because council steps in and pulls properties, often with no explanation. So you're dealing with a clientele that's aggravated because of a process that is, again, not particularly helpful, a process that is that takes too long, and a process that has been arguably manipulated for the people in the know. So often properties are pulled because maybe a council member gave a call, or someone from the media gave a call, or a community organization gave a call. And while all those things could have really good intentions, what it shows is a process that's easily manipulated. And that's a problem. And so, I mean, this is sort of the 10,000 foot overview of this audit that I'm talking about. But basically, what the audit found was that the process needs to have solid procedures, better transparency, and and as we move to this new model of the land bank, that they've got to adopt those kind of procedures as well. One of the reasons, if you remember when we had this discussion about the land bank, I wasn't crazy about the whole idea of the land bank, because the land bank, as it was being discussed, turned out to be something different than what we ended up having. But one of the concerns has always been this process, having a process that is open and transparent. One of the reasons that I came around to thinking positively about the land bank was that we would have a process that was that. And at least to this point, we don't have that, right? So we need to have, as we move forward with the land bank, or as we continue with the finance department, we need to have processes and procedures in place that are fair and that are transparent. And if you look through the audit, you'll see a number of graphs and calculations that we did as far as how long it takes to sell a property, how long it takes to approve a buyer, and then once a buyer is approved, what that person has to go through to continue to be approved to be a buyer, the process of the sale itself, and then again to be able to go through that entire process, often taking years, and then at the end have that sale pulled out from under you is really a troublesome thing. And the other thing is that there's so many properties that we'll just hold on to forever, and probably the URA is more guilty of that than we, the city, are. But when you look at their portfolio, their inventory, they've got properties that they've had for 50 years and more, with the hope of future development. And one of the things that we have found about from the URA is that when they decide to hold a property, they normally don't even tell you why. Just the secrecy and the lack of transparency around that whole process is also troublesome. So, I mean, we did this audit with the hopes that council would take a look at the process, hope to inform the ongoing process with the land bank, and hopefully have a better process going forward. One thing I will tell you that we didn't look at, which also needs to really be discussed. We're talking about here the properties that the city owns or that the URA owns. We say nothing about that whole bunch of properties out there that are in limbo because we don't want to buy them, but the owners have long ago abandoned them. So we're talking about properties that are tax delinquent for 10 and 20 years that are still in the name of an original owner, in many cases have long since passed. And so one of the things that the land bank, I think, has to really deal with is how do they deal with those properties? Are they going to accept those properties and actually have ownership of those properties and allow those properties to go through a process that cleans their title and allows them to be issued for sale? There's a whole bunch of those properties out there, and we really need, and the land bank really needs to think about how they're going to deal with those properties, or those properties that someone today says, you know what, this property's too much for me. I'm giving it back to the city. Here, take it. Well, the city won't take those properties, right? Will the land bank, and they should, and hopefully they will. But they've got to have a process for that, because there are a lot of those kind of properties around Pittsburgh, in neighborhoods all over the city, where people have just decided that they're underwater and they're not gonna, they're gonna walk away from it.
I'm going to interject just a minute, because before we turned on the cameras and called to order, I wanted to be sure that we're all using the same vocabulary. Given that this really is, you could do a giant kind of flow chart of trying to figure out the different processes that we are, in a regulatory way, have to do, with notice to the courts and notice to the states and all these kinds of public periods. We went, again, through in a lot of depth 5 years ago when we were talking about the creation of the land bank. One of the things you just said, Controller, was that there are properties out there that are delinquent that we don't own. The treasurer and I were just saying that, so are we saying the properties that are delinquent, she has on a list, and that is a publicly posted list, and that list is where?
On the website.
Under the Treasurer's Department on the website?
Finance Department.
So
yes.
Finance Department,
Delinquency
so
list.
there's a list of delinquencies, and I think, Controller, those are some of the ones you're talking about, maybe that haven't, there's been no one to pay taxes on a property, it's been abandoned for years. But and when you say the word owned, I think sometimes we also say the word acquired under the treasurer sale state, powers, right? And so that, I think the Finance Department refers to as the inventory, the total inventory, is in the ballpark of about 14,000 properties. But that list is not publicly posted, and I have some questions about that. So there's two separate universes here that we're talking about. The list of properties that we have acquired as the city but have not moved out is 14,000. And then in your report, you're talking about, I've got to the page where you're talking about the ones that council deletes. For example, in 2016, there were 166 properties that came to this table to be sold to a property owner, and 43 were deleted by council vote. So that was about 20%. And then in 2017, you have properties that came off of the 14,000 list that came to this table to be auctioned, to be approved for auction, were 85. And of that 85, 25% were deleted by council vote. Okay, so I just want to kind of put that in perspective when you say like a council member, opposes a sale. In 2017, the most recent, that happened 25 times. But given in the context of 14,000 properties that have been abandoned and acquired, some of them, as you say, for 50 years or so. It's a big universe. And then on top of that, there are delinquent properties. And do we know additionally what that universe of properties is?
The number of delinquent.
The one that's, you say you have publicly posted?
Not right offhand.
All right, so I've just
I do
got
wanna
scribbled
comment
down.
on the 14,000 that you were just speaking about being delinquent, being inventory of the city. Not all of those parcels are available for sale. Part
And-
of those
Go ahead.
14,000 are greenways.
Mm-hmm.
They're properties that are on hold by the URA.
Mm-hmm.
What other category do we have to?
For various reasons, planning, parks, those are makeup of everything. As I mentioned earlier, the properties that the city of Pittsburgh deems for sale are the 2005 properties that we have for available for sale. That means we've taken them in for delinquency and putting those back out for city of Pittsburgh residents to purchase.
So I think that, though, for clarity's sake then, how many properties were delinquent and then acquired by the city? How many of those in your spreadsheet that you maintain were acquired by the city? That weren't
is that-
originally, let's say, not Shenley Park, or,
So-
not Mellon Park.
Yeah, that would be the properties that
No,
we have available for sale.
no, I'm sorry. There have been more than 2,000 abandoned properties in the city. So
Definitely.
I don't think
more
this is
than
a,
2,000.
so I'm going to put this kind of up here for so these are my notes here. I think this is an important part of this discussion, just so we know. Are we talking about 100 properties? Are we talking about 1,000 properties? Are we talking about 14,000 properties? You're saying the city inventory are those properties that, let's say somebody walked away from it in 1980, right? It sat on the delinquent list for years, and now it has been added to the city inventory, right? And of those, you only have 2,000 available for sale, right? But so, are you telling me that 13,999 are Shenley Park and Mellon Park, and there's only one?
So a lot of those are just also properties that the city is retaining for permanent ownership. Some of them are permanent ownership. Some of those properties are being held for transfer for URA.
So I'm going to contend that this is also part of the confusion and frustration that this isn't public information. We should literally have that list sitting here on the middle of the table. And again, I've lobbied for it before to be posted on the website, and it was for a time. I think it was 2015. And that's gone. And so I think that would really clear up a lot of confusion on the public's part, and certainly on council members' part.
But I would tell you that the number of tax delinquent properties in the city, obviously changes every day, right? So some people come in and pay their taxes, some people don't, and year to year, I will guarantee you that right now there are way more than 14,000 properties delinquent in taxes.
But that's
yeah.
not already acquired.
Right. But
So is this, are we talking about 30,000, 40,000? And I just also want to put in context that in my recollection, if you look at the entire city map, right, to our boundaries, there's roughly 140,000 individual private parcels, right? So it's about that much. So, even in the ones that we've acquired, is that 10%, right, that are abandoned? Or are you telling me 13,000 of those are really just park space that have been parks for 100 years?
I'm a little confused by your use of the word acquired, because we
Right.
really haven't acquired many at all, right? The only ones we acquire right now are the ones that people want to buy. So if there's a delinquent property sitting out there and it's next to your house and you want to buy it, then you come to the city and they'll begin
when
the
we say
process
it's-
of a treasure sale to clean up the title
Right.
and sell you that property. But there are a whole bunch of properties out there that no one wants to buy right now, right? That are just sit out there in limbo, that have not been acquired by the city. They're still in the names of the original owner. They are delinquent in many cases for years and years and years. And nothing's going to happen with those until somebody comes along and says, "Hey, I want to buy that." My thought is that those properties should be acquired by the land bank. They should be within the land bank property.
So that your limbo is the same as Margaret's delinquent list?
I don't believe so.
So there's even more.
yeah.
And we don't know how many may be in limbo, and we don't know how many right now.
Right.
I think the delinquent list
I
is
mean, I think
knowable because it's a list that's up there, but we just don't have it in front of us right now.
But I think that's easily
Correct. Okay, yes.
Yeah, I think that's easily ascertainable, right?
Yeah,
So we
it
can tell you how many properties are delinquent taxation right now.
Mm-hmm.
Some may be delinquent just for a year, some maybe for more than that. But that information is readily available. It's not out on a website somewhere, but it's readily available. Again, it changes every day.
Absolutely.
And then to add to that, you want to add the delinquent properties that are over at Jordan Tax Services. And we're talking about probably
I'm
over.
sorry, is that another?
That's another.
Okay. I didn't think this was going to be as complicated
Yeah,
as I
there-
thought when
there's-
I
there's
first
another-
asked, so I'm
another
glad I
list-
asked.
List of delinquent properties that are, the delinquency is collected by Jordan Tax Services.
And,
All right.
and just to be clear, the audit only looked at those properties that have been involved in the process of the treasurer's sale, or those properties that are already acquired by the city or by the URA. Those are the only things that we were really looking at. So there's a whole host of properties out there that we're not even talking about in the audit itself. Again, this audit was to look at that specific process and make recommendations.
Wonderful. So this is why, again, this was actually just like the framing conversation. It's this important because there's really a huge percentage of the parcels in the city of Pittsburgh that are not only not under stewardship, not really being cared for, they could be dragging down a street or an entire neighborhood, but then also aren't generating any revenue and are not being put into any productive purpose.
There's so much about this. Okay, first off, let's start with the very basic issue that everything we do is relying on the revenues we bring in, and the biggest revenue we bring in is property taxes, and that all starts with someone owning that property. So now we have all this property that no one owns, so to speak. We've got to deal. That's a big chunk of the parcels within the city of Pittsburgh. Add to that the whole issue of blight.
Yeah.
And the blight that's created by this problem, and the fact that the city is not particularly good about maintaining the properties they own, let alone the properties that are out in that limbo world, which we really probably don't even have the right to maintain. So there are a lot of real problems that this creates, but the basic one from my perspective is just that basic one of our largest source of revenue is property taxes, and we've got this big chunk of property that's producing nothing. And we're not doing much about it.
Right.
Councilwoman, if I could add to that, one of the things too is like this problem with these properties wasn't created overnight. We go back 10 years or more in previous administrations whereas when the property became delinquent and it went into a sale, well, at that point in time, even if there was no buyer for that property was acquired by the city, because anything that was put in the sale was delinquent. Once the sale was over, the city would acquire it.
And so we still have those. So, Controller,
So-
when you were saying we don't have acquired properties that an individual has not requested,
we
that's
do
actually
now.
not true. We
do that now.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
We do that now. But I'm saying the inventory built up because
It
we
built
were
up.
acquiring everything and didn't have a buyer or a plan.
Over
put-
decades.
Over decades.
Starting from the 40s.
Exactly.
Yeah. So there are not, that's not, that list of 14,000 city actual owned properties. Some of them aren't parkland. Some of them actually are private properties that have still liens officially attached to them, even if it was acquired in maybe 1950. Yeah. And so it would be, I think, really helpful for council to get a more accurate picture. We've kind of sketched out, I think, a bunch of the empty boxes that need to be filled in order so that we can see not just how many are in each box, but I would also suggest that what would be very fruitful is to have them mapped, right, in color code, right, with the legend that these are the different statuses of the properties so that we can see where they are. Because honestly, I'm just going to jump here. I know we're jumping all over the place, but again, I apologize. I wasn't called in to chair this meeting until the last minute. So I'm probably ending my own 2 cents. This is a significant impact, not just on property revenue, but also on neighborhoods and on our land use, right? And it's this table's job to make decisions about land use.
I would just add that you may want to include on that map a breakout of properties that are owned by your component units, because you do have well, obviously they're property owned by the housing authority, but the URA properties, there are a significant number of properties that are owned by the URA, which are different than the properties that the city owns that the URA has asked us to hold.
Property reserve.
Right.
Is
So
that.
yeah. So you've got those.
Property
You've
reserve
got
is the community
different
groups.
categories there as well.
Excuse me, we're getting some more vocabulary.
Correction, yeah.
Clarification.
The
Property
reserve is
reserve only
only-
applies to the CDCs.
That's correct, the
So
reserves.
neighborhood groups that might be, something like the Highland Park Community Development Corporation or the Mount Washington Community Development Corporation. They have a certain tax code and
For the
mission.
reserves. the
And
reserve
so
properties.
they, under city ordinance from the 60s and then renewed in the 90s, can save one of the 14,000 properties, but not in the other categories. Just they have the list of newly delinquent or newly acquired?
Newly delinquent.
Newly delinquent ones that they can flag, but I believe the last time I'm remembering, I feel like taking an exam for a class I took 4 years ago, is a cap of a total of 300?
Yes.
Okay,
that's
so
correct.
300, that may be no more than 300 of the 14,000 plus delinquent list. And then the URA may reserve how many? Is there a cap?
No, never has been.
All right. URA has some unlimited, and right now, we can't say exactly how many, but it is recorded somewhere.
Yeah, we have an accurate amount of what's being held and what neighborhood, what purpose.
Well, I'm assuming they're all by lot and block number, so we can know exactly where they are. Okay.
They are, and we detailed that in the audit, at least at that time. So that's probably changed since then. But at the time of the audit, we did produce a listing of what was held and the reasons why. And then in some cases, the reasons weren't particularly defined, which is a problem too.
Sure. Would you like to speak more to that? I mean, we have, it seems from the administration side, you described that some of the parcels in the 14,000 inventory are flagged for Greenway or to study even for
Hold
Greenway.
for
I
study,
think I
yeah.
have.
Hold for the URA.
The last time I had the administration email me this copy was in 2015, I think. And so you can see some of those things. There's permanent ownership, city-owned, hold temporary, hold for study, hold for study, hold for study, hold for study, approved for sale. So how does one in the administration, and I'll get back to the URA, hold those? Is it an act of council?
So hold for study was a hold code that was generated by Bill Waddell. Bill Waddell used the code hold for study for properties that he felt that just either unsafe or various reasons, hillsides, just properties that weren't buildable, just non-usable properties. We actually have looked at a lot of those and have made a lot of different decisions than our prior predecessors.
And what do you use as guidance for changing that label?
So we would reach out to the various colleagues that can give us an idea, and that's like planning. Is this property, is it usable? Can it be a property that can be built on? I mean, has it been something that DPW has stabilized? So those are kind of things that we look at for the hold for studies now and make a decision on if we can sell those and make sure that they're safe for City of Pittsburgh residents to acquire.
Okay, so, whether they're zoned hillside or not zoned hillside, I think would be a very easy for everyone to understand, right? Because it's literally in zoning, it's law that you can't build. Because, we did the zoning discussion with all the public comment period and changed the zoning for a lot of parcels in the city of Pittsburgh because there were such steep hillsides that they, as we know, our hillsides are literally increasingly unstable, right? They weren't very stable 20 years ago, but they're even, with increased rainfall, even more of them are unstable. So it may be even time to revisit that hillside zoning to be sure that we have enough of the parcels actually zoned hillside. This is another side topic. And so it appears that the administration or the real estate department specifically is looking at this inventory that are acquired and then changing with, and so how is that information shared with the public or council? So let's say tomorrow you decide to change 1,000 of these properties into not for sale.
So we really don't, we look over those properties, but a lot of the cases that we come across where we're looking at and making decisions are when we have application for a City of Pittsburgh resident to acquire something like that, and then we would look into it. And then from there, if it's contiguous or if there's other properties around it, we start to venture more into see if, those properties can also be sold. So that's kind of how we do that.
Right now, if someone comes in and want to buy a particular piece of property and we see that it's hold for study, then we would reach out to that authority or planning or whatever department and inquire about that property. Is it really something that we need to continue to hold, or is this property valuable? Can we, viable where we could sell a property?
Is it in line for a park?
Do you have the authority to make those choices?
As far as whether we could sell it?
Yeah.
We don't make that decision. That when we reach out to
Sounds like you
planning
are.
and the other authorities, that they tell us whether the property can be sold.
So I think you just told me that the URA gets to decide of the 14,000 properties, or the housing authority, or all of the above?
Well, these are properties that are on hold for study, the properties that we just talked about.
That Bill Waddell flagged
Right,
in a
that Bill
database as
Waddell
hold for
flagged.
study.
Those would be
properties
different than a hold.
Did he have the authority to flag those as hold for study?
At that point in time, yes, Bill Waddell was the only one that knew, more about the city-owned properties than anyone. And
Because that sounds to me like
he handled
land
a
use
lot of
decisions.
the-
I'm sorry, I'm going to have to push back
He
a little
worked
bit.
with planning a lot, and I guess from working with planning, he could authorize whether that property could be on hold.
I think
So I
only
looked at-
this table can authorize that, actually.
I looked at Bill as a hybrid guy. He came from planning, but he was in our real estate division. But a lot of his activity was in the planning department. So he was a hybrid guy. He understood what could be sold, what couldn't be sold in terms of stabilization and things of that sort.
I'd probably say it a little differently. I would say that he acted as if he had that authority. Whether he actually did or not is a good question.
Sounds
Yeah,
to me
that's
like
true. I would
someone
agree with
could
that.
call that shadow zoning, right?
Yeah,
Which is
yeah.
not okay,
Yeah.
actually, right? So I'm going to go back to the fact that we have a list that we don't have publicly that is 14,000 properties, that we can't say here in this hearing whether it's 13,999 parcels that are parks and one that is actually was delinquent and acquired by the city, or 13,999 that were delinquent and acquired for the city and could be possibly for sale or other public use. I'm not convinced that every single one of them should be sold just for property tax revenue. When needs in neighborhoods change so dramatically, there may be other things that are for the common good. Whether those are community gardens, whether that is public space, whether that is stormwater retention, whether that's trails, and there are lots of things that neighborhoods have desires for, and that it is the city's ability and responsibility to provide. But that this is seeming to look murkier.
I'm just, and I don't want the audit that we did to mischaracterize this, because we talk a little bit about this, but it's not the point of the audit. And these properties and how they're characterized as to why they're being held. I'm not even saying they're being held for bad ideas, for bad reasons. The problem is it's just not clearly communicated as to why and for how long, right?
Or
So-
maybe not even clearly authorized.
Right.
as
Well,
to
that's
why.
the other thing. Was there an actual authorization that permitted that hold to be in place? My guess is that if you go through the administrative regs and rules of this city, that somewhere along the line they probably are acting within their authority. I'm guessing. That's a good question. But the problem that I have with everything that's in this audit is that the lack of transparency on this inventory and the status of these properties and the purposes for which people are being denied because of holds. I'm not saying that's necessarily negative or bad reasons that they're doing this. Just that they're not clear and making those reasons understood to people. This process, what we found about this process is that because it's so long, because it has so many complicated parts, it's easy to manipulate when you know your way around the system. And that, as a public organization, we shouldn't be operating that way.
I agree.
So the problem is we have to tighten up the timelines on these decisions. We have to tighten up the policies and procedures through written regs around these decisions. I do think that a lot of this was basically put on hold several years ago because we assumed that the land bank would be taking over a lot of this stuff.
That's correct.
And so it hasn't happened. So, I mean, I can't just lay blame on the finance department for this. The fact is, a lot of this stuff we thought we weren't going to be dealing with anymore. And here we are.
Yes. And we don't have someone here from the land bank, right? No one here serves on the land bank board. So that is probably another conversation that's worthy of having when we have different people at the table.
I agree. And again, I would when that conversation happens, the big question to me is, what is the land bank going to do about properties that have long ago been abandoned that up until this point the city has refused to take?
Right.
And are they going to have the financial resources to take those properties, clean the title, and have a real land bank of properties that are marketably for sale, or that have marketable title?
So we have a kind of a big question mark here of, again, how many are Jordan tax, right? This adds up to be way more than, I always had a 14,000 number as the kind of universe in my head that I've always talked about as abandoned and not, being either repurposed or being disposed so that they would be paying property tax. But I'm not sure that's it. So we still need to have filled in kind of like how many are at Jordan tax, how many we think are in limbo, how many are on the delinquent list.
There's probably about over 13,000 at Jordan, delinquent accounts.
Okay.
And these are accounts owned by individuals.
Yeah, but is that number reflective of the parcel, or is that reflective of the year? Because that number may.
Those are delinquent accounts.
It's individual
are they
accounts?
Individual accounts.
Individual accounts based on the parcel, or individual accounts
parcel.
based on the
Right.
year of delinquency?
Based on the parcel.
Oh, okay.
So it would be even more, just for the listeners, right? If you added up the delinquencies each year and the same property is delinquent 5 years in a row,
Right.
Now
There's probably some
We don't want to be
overlap.
counting it 5
There's probably
times,
overlap
but the
there.
treasurer says she's
Yeah, they
only
could be
counting it
delinquent
once.
for more than 1 year.
Yeah.
But there is also an overlap on the parcels that are delinquent. The Jordan Tax Service collects for. Those parcels are also listed on our website as delinquent
Right. So
because they're delinquent for this year, for the previous
exactly.
year.
The
Yes.
14,000 parcels you have there would be duplicated in much
Yes.
of Jordan's list. because those are
The
delinquent.
inventory?
Yes.
They're already
Yes.
acquired. Or your delinquent list, which is still
Delinquent
blank.
list.
The delinquent list.
This one and this one may be overlapping.
Yes.
But they're still in addition to the 14,000 that are the acquired properties.
Yes, it is.
I thought there was a question, because again, I want to make sure that everybody's kind of just using the same vocabulary, because it's part of the confusing part here.
Because you're talking about properties that's in the inventory, which is the 14,000, which have 2,000 of them are available for sale.
So that's true. This
Then
one
you're
is a
talking
subset
about-
of this one, so I'm going to put parentheses around it.
And then you're talking
not
about
gonna do
the
that.
delinquent accounts that are collected, the delinquency is collected by Jordan Tax Service. But the delinquent list that's listed on the city's website, finance department, are also a component of the ones that Jordan Tax Service
all of them have been
collecting
given to
from.
Jordan Tax so
Maybe
far?
not necessarily
No, I
all of
think
them, because if
there's
there's
a bit overlap.
multiple years.
And the Jordan tax is bigger than the current year delinquent list, which may slightly overlap with the Jordan list.
Right.
Am I following you
You're
guys?
right.
I
don't
just
know
want to
that
make sure
that's-
I'm not.
I think you're
that
close.
I'm-
I think
Yeah.
there are probably also some on the delinquent list that are older that Jordan never had. Right, because Jordan's only been collecting for us for the last 10 years. And there would be some on that delinquent list that are older than 10 years, I would think.
You mean on the city's delinquent list?
Yeah.
No, we transferred everything to Jordan.
I'm not sure about that because they are. Oh, that's right. We sold the old ones too.
Right.
That's right. I'm sorry. You're right. You're right. You're right.
Okay. So, and then if we break out this, I don't think I have these right here. The 300 properties, they're in property reserve.
That's
May
part
or
of
may
this.
not only be the city inventory, but they may have come from other, let's say, again, I don't want to, imaginary neighborhoods, community development corporation, and I say, I want these 2 properties. Can I name 2 properties that are on the Jordan tax list?
If you can,
Yeah.
you can say, okay,
you
person comes in and
flagged
say, I
them.
want to inquire about these 2 properties.
No, I mean a CDC for property reserve.
If they're delinquent, yes.
Okay, so I can
That would
say
start the
as a
process.
CDC, please save these for my neighborhood, whether they're on the city inventory or they're on the delinquent list.
Right, but you're using the wrong language. It's not save them for.
What are they, okay, so
What they have to do is fill out a form, and
Uh-huh.
Aaron can take it from there. They fill out a request to purchase form.
Yeah, and then they reserve the property, and then we meet with them monthly to get an idea of, what their intentions are. We do a feasibility with them, and then the city of Pittsburgh allows them to participate in this unification between the city of Pittsburgh and the CDCs to acquire properties.
And they're only allowed to have the intent to purchase for 3 years, 5 years, or something like that, and then they relinquish the rights to, I think there's a limit in the legislation.
Yeah, there's a due out date once they set up a due out date with the city of Pittsburgh once they decide they want to purchase that property, and then we send them a list to let them know, hey, you're close to your due out date. Here's the due out date.
But the URA has no due out date and has no total limit. So again, the ones that are URA, I wrote property reserve, but that's not right. It's URA, what is the
Not really
Technical
a
label
property
for that.
reserve. It's just the coding in the system in the city
URA
inventory.
might want it someday?
Our
On
code,
hold for the
our
URA.
coding, and our eProperty Plus website, which is our database that we also have online for the city of Pittsburgh residents to purchase from. The code that we use for URA is URA transfer.
URA transfer, but as the controller points out, some of them have been coded that way since 1948. Okay. And can you tell me how many are labeled URA transfer?
I don't have the exact number on me now, but I can get that information. But it's a significant amount of the 14,000.
More than 10%?
Definitely.
More than
Maybe about 50%.
50%, we think.
Yeah.
But you said of the 14,000 that we're calling the city inventory? But are they able to, or do you label any of the delinquent or the Jordan tax ones as URA transfer?
No.
No.
So
Because they're-
the property reserve can be requested for the ones that are outside the universe of the 14,000. But the URA for transfer cannot be.
They could be if the URA said, "Hey, we want that one." You know, what I mean, there'd have to be
So
an
they are
affirmative
possibly,
step. There would
but
be
right
an-
now there are none?
excuse me.
Right now there are none, but it's possible that they could be.
Well, there's times that we do get individuals that come in that want property
Sorry, I'm
that,
sorry. The other testifier is just that there are no properties on delinquent list or Jordan tax that are labeled URA transfer.
no.
There shouldn't be.
No.
Yeah, there shouldn't be.
And so we think.
Now the fact is, the URA could now say, "Hey, let's put a hold on these properties when it comes, and then they would be, at least there'd be a hold on them so people would know they couldn't buy them."
Is that different than, and that comes later in the process after they've been requested? So they have veto
Yeah.
power.
Yeah, basically they do.
And so in addition to having 7,000 properties taken off and made unavailable to the public that are labeled URA transfer, then also there's an unknown number that are hypothetically for sale, but then when someone requests them, they are derailed somehow?
That's right. I don't know that I would characterize them as for sale at that point
Yeah.
because they're just delinquent properties at that point.
They were
They're not going to.
temporarily for sale until someone at the URA calls you?
No. So you have a delinquent property. Somebody wants it. They approach and say, "I want to buy that property." At that point, it's not for sale yet, right? Because it's still just a delinquent property in some person's name, right? So then someone comes in and says, "I want to buy that property." Okay, then they start the process. Okay, at that point, the URA may come and say, "Oh, you know what? Don't sell that. We're holding that." So they do kind of have veto power over that in a way, but it doesn't come up until someone actually approaches the city for sale.
And we think that that's an additional universe of 13,000 properties that they have veto power over.
That's right. It would be the remainder of the ones they don't already have hold. Yeah.
And in another scenario, URA could have a development going on, and the properties are delinquent, and they request from the city to place those properties in a treasure sale, and then once we acquire them, we hold
when they
for
initiate-
the URA.
If they initiate a purchase, hey, I want to buy those properties, there's nobody that vetoes them.
No.
That's an extraordinary amount of power for an elected body this body is the proper body over anything that is city property.
Well, this gets back to the point, right? This gets back to the idea that it's a process that is hidden, and because it's so hidden, it's easily manipulated. So let's say you have let's say the URA has a property that they have put a hold on, and a constituent comes to a council member and says, "Hey, what's going on with this?" And that council member makes a couple calls, and sure enough, a few days later, there's no longer a hold on that property.
Okay, so we've talked
It
about that. You have that
happens.
documented. You
Yeah.
have that documented. There was 25, not 13,000.
But what I'm
plus
saying is,
7,000, which is
it's,
20,000.
and I'm just using that as one example of a system that is easily manipulated, and that it's one thing to operate right, it's another thing to actually look like you're operating right. We're not doing either of those right now. And I use the council example just because we're here in council.
Because
But
you
the
know
fact of the
about
matter
it,
is-
and we all know about it because we can see it on TV. Sorry, I know I'm not sure I'm doing my rightful
what I'm
role
saying-
as chair
but
here.
what I'm saying is, but that process is manipulated from within. That process is manipulated by the administration. That process is manipulated by friends who come in and say, "Hey, can you help me with this?" And it's not. I don't mean to point out council because it happens in every step along the way. We've seen it. I mean, we've seen how manipulated this structure is. When you've got a system that takes years just to approve a buyer, that's ripe for corruption. That's what's happened. We've swung the door open to corruption and fraud through this process because there aren't tight policies and procedures. Again, partly, in large part, because for the last couple of years, we've relied on a non-existent land bank to take over a lot of this operation.
yeah.
The promise of a land bank has really caused a lot of these problems.
So we've been talking now for nearly an hour. Do you have, aside from the recommendations in the controller's audit, and I should probably tell everybody where it's available, but I don't have it. So what's your?
It's available on the, if you want to review it, it's available on the controller's website at the city. So it's pittsburghpa.gov/controller, and it is the most recent audit that's in the performance audit list of audits that we have on the site. So it's readily available. You could pull it up and print it off, or you can pull it up and read it. Either way.
Thank you. I want to switch a little bit, so I'm really glad I didn't intend to stop with digging into the kind of universes of the, where these properties are, but I think it does help explain and illustrate the problems in the process. But also, this kind of, I want to shift to what is possible that we may or may not be doing, so that we have 13,000 properties that are delinquent, 14,000 properties that are in inventory, and we have obviously some kind of administrative policies that maybe need to be examined and publicly discussed and revisited in a legislative way. But then also, kind of, this is an open-ended question that I do not know the answer to. Let's say that an LLC from Florida applies to acquire a property. And this is one of the things that, as a council member, I motion to delete a property for. The controller audit spends a good amount of time on the fact that we vet prospective buyers. But we're vetting them, and correct me if I'm reading this incorrectly, whether or not they owe City of Pittsburgh taxes, have any City of Pittsburgh citations, and is there anything else, maybe? Are in good standing, basically, as City of Pittsburgh, as if they were City of Pittsburgh residents. Well, they're not City of Pittsburgh residents, right? So even if I am a City of Pittsburgh resident and I have I have 100 citations on 100 different properties and I owe you a gazillion taxes, well, I'm just going to set up an LLC in Monroeville and then I'm going to apply to buy your property. You're going to look up that LLC and you're going to find, well, there's no citations, there's no liens, you're good to go, right? Am I portraying that accurately?
So our business tax department does a real good job at looking at all that information and searching the different entities and where they lie in information, and then they provide that to us, and then we make a decision on it.
So you think you would catch anyone who was a Monroeville LLC who was really actually a City of Pittsburgh resident or had citations in the
If
City
you
of
owe the
Pittsburgh
City
as
of
operator?
Pittsburgh taxes, we would catch you.
What if I've never done anything in the City of Pittsburgh before and I'm just like two guys sitting around in their living room in Orlando and we filed an LLC and I want to buy 10 properties? And I've never even owned a piece of property in my life. And
So
I don't know what I'm
Councilwoman,
doing with it, and I have actually no intent to do anything but squat on it.
Oh, okay. So are you suggesting that we not sell property to people that don't
That's
live in
one of the
city?
ones that I'll just say, because I talked about it here on live TV some number of years ago. There was a parcel in Lawrenceville that was when there were still delinquent properties that you could acquire. I don't know that there are any right now. And it was in Upper Lawrenceville, and it made it all the way to the table to be approved for auction and or for sale to that prospective buyer. And my staff tracked it down to, it was basically somebody in Georgia who was just really speculating and not looking to do anything with the property or didn't know what they were doing, right? And so I think you have those opportunistic investors that we've seen before result in FBI investigations and federal mortgage fraud cases and properties that are still stuck in Mount Washington that are rotting to the ground. So can we legally, I guess my question that I don't know the answer to is, should we, or could we even, is it legal for us to pass an ordinance that says that you have to be a resident of the City of Pittsburgh?
I couldn't answer that.
I don't either. I don't
Yeah,
know.
I
Legal
don't
discussion.
think you could get away with that constitutionally. But let me just so we're clear about process, okay? If you own property outside of Allegheny County, these situations are handled much differently, right? So in most counties in Allegheny County, they have what you call a tax claim bureau, who oversee all the tax collection on delinquent properties for every municipality within that county. Butler County is one that I'm familiar with because I've been involved in some sales in that county. If you do not pay your taxes are due in June. If by the following June you have not paid the taxes for that year, your property is listed for sale. That sale takes place in September, and the property is sold. Whether you own $100 on it or $1 million on the property, that property is sold to the highest bidder. It's publicized in the newspaper. Those sales are they attract a lot of people, come in and bid on those properties. It's kind of harsh, right? I mean, because a lot of times the notice isn't great, particularly if you live outside the county and you don't get the Butler Eagle. The posting of the property a lot of times isn't particularly good. So there are a lot of arguments around why that's not a great thing. There was recently a story I don't know if it's in the Post or in the New York Times, about a gentleman from D.C. who had lost a piece of property in a neighborhood that was gentrifying because he was delinquent less than $300 in taxes. He lost a property that was six figures. That we don't want that in Pittsburgh.
We don't want that,
right? But we do need a process that is more open to competition and pricing than what we have right now. And that sunlight that's not going to deal with every bad actor who wants to buy property and doesn't deal with everyone who's creating sub-corporations to hide who they are. But having a process that lets people know what's being sold and for how much would put an end to a lot of it.
I would like that very much, to have a process that people know what's being sold and for how much. And in addition, it sounds like we also have a problem with what's not being sold and why. So I think there's a lot more to talk about. Is there something that I didn't ask you about that, we had opening comments, I think, a little bit, but I want to give some time for if there's anything that you feel we should be talking about that we haven't talked about.
No, I just want to basically say that, that I had said before that this is something that just wasn't created overnight. And this is the process, this whole process of the city inventory and acquiring properties. This has been something that's been going on for a lot of administrations. I know I've been here at least 6 administrations. And like I said, the previous administration, it was, whatever was delinquent, we acquire, and we end up with this big inventory now of property that we can't sell. So, I mean, we reviewed and we've taken in the controller's audit, and we're looking at, making changes to some of our processes. But what other people should keep in mind too is that in the process of acquiring the property, there are court dates that, we have no control over. Scheduling these properties to quiet the title, that's a process that we have no control over. So I guess the bottom line is we're doing the best we can, right now with this big inventory, but there is always room for improvement, which we're looking at, improving some of the processes and the way we advertise the property for sale and the way we advertise it to the public.
Mr. Pickett, anything more?
No, that's it. Just what Director Lanier says, and her and I and our team meet weekly to discuss these things, and we're looking at creating a lot of efficiencies and a lot more transparency in the property disposition.
William?
Now, I would just add, I'd hope that the land bank, as they move forward, will take some of this into consideration and use it as a guide as to how they'll conduct their operations moving forward.
And I think we can all look forward to just having we should have more public discussion about this. These are very big, multi-part policies, right? So we got to dig into this idea of the inventory and what things come to sale and what don't, and how those are disposed of today. But I do think there's a great deal more to talk about. Okay, with that, we'll adjourn. Thank you.